Hello friends, Amy R here with Prairie Paper and Ink with a couple of relatively easy cards. Really the only work is a bit of masking. I'm using the new Painted Flowers Wreath stencil from Simon Says Stamp's All the Feels release. And looking at it, I was like, rainbow. I want rainbow colors. I mentioned this, I think, in my last video. It's been windy and snowy and gross here in Saskatchewan. It's still March. We generally have miserable weather in March. So anywho, I'm in like bright spring color, rainbow all the time. Anyway, I decided I wanted to do the ink blending, do rainbow colors, use my distress inks, and then add water because distress inks are very water reactive. You could use other water reactive inks. You could use oxides. Those would work as well. Whatever you want to do. If you don't want to do the water spraying that I'm going to do after I'm done this, and you just want a smooth look, I would do whatever ink you want and do that on Simon's 120 pound smooth white cardstock because inks just blend on it like a dream. But I wanted water reactive and texture and all that fun stuff. So I'm doing this on the textured side of distress watercolor paper. And I'm just using painter's tape. And funny enough, like I'm masking off like each little section doing my rainbow colors. Although when I spray, things start to like meld into each other anyway. So I probably could have mostly just avoided, and just blended and not worried so much about it. But, it just is what it is. So I just kept moving the painter's tape and just kind of working my way around. I started with pink and then went in rainbow order. I will have links to the specific distress colors because I used 2 colors per image just to give things, that little bit more. Plus I just love layering, colors like this. It gives it that little extra bit of dimension. So I just kept working my way around this wreath and I'm just using like my ink blending tools. You could totally use, blending brushes, whatever floats your boat. But I've got, little blending foams for every distress color. And with the minis, I just store them in the bottom of the minis. I don't have those new rounded foams yet. They're in an order on the way to me because I'm curious. I'm gonna play with those when I get them. But yeah, just use my regular old distress blending foams. Same old, same old. So I went around, blended all my fabulous rainbow colors. I did it twice, because why not? And then sprayed it with water. Now, distress inks, very water reactive. It depends on how much water you use, all that sort of thing, but they immediately want to move. So I have my heat tool at the ready to start drying, because I don't want it to just come... If you sprayed it heavily with water, like they would just move, and you would have nothing. Like just color. You wouldn't have any definition from the stencil or anything like that. So I was spraying and then quickly starting to dry everything. I pulled out my Ranger Heat It craft tool just cuz. I don't know. I was just curious. If you have the same Wagner heat tool that I have that I use for heat embossing, which I'll show a little later on, people have asked me, like, do you need both? Technically, no, because the Wagner one has 2 settings, like a lower setting that's not as... I don't know if it's a lower heat setting. I think it's more just it doesn't blow as much air. The Ranger Heat It craft tool is great though because that's just it. It doesn't blow a ton of air. It literally is a heat it tool. So it's great for drying projects, drying watercolor, things like that without blowing a lot of air because if you don't want things moving, if that makes sense, So I thought I would use that on this. Why not? So to each their own. I don't like the Heat It tool though for heat embossing, because it's not meant for that. It takes too long. So, do you need both tools? Technically, no. But I also like having all the tools because I just do. So, anywho, I did my bit of spraying, dried it with my heat tool. And then, of course, I'm going to add some splatter. I wanted everything dry before adding the splatter. If you add splatter while things are still wet, the splatter will just, again, like meld into the water and move and you won't have really splatter anymore. As always, it just depends on the look you're going for. I wanted to add the splatter just to give, again, more like texture and color and all that fun stuff because I was just having fun with this. So I kind of added the splatter along each image was, green splatter where the little green leaves were, etc. But at the same time, I'm not too concerned about it because, You want things to be a little organic. Splatter also has a mind of its own and likes to go everywhere. So I just went along and used just one from each color because I'd used 2 colors for the blending, 2 pinks, 2 oranges, etc. But for the splatter, I just used 1, and I was just grabbing them at random, smushing them onto a palette, swirling it with a little bit of water, splattering. That's it. You don't need to heat set the splatter. I just did that to prevent me from smearing things. Because usually I put an elbow in it or, that sort of a thing. So I dried it with the heat tool just to make sure I don't end up, creating a big old mess for myself. And then once it was dry, I did end up die cutting these with one of Simon's basic rectangle wafer dies just to make it smaller than my A2 card front. So did all of that. And then for my main sentiments, I'm using the new XL, extra large Greetings 2 stamp set. Love anything with sentiments. Honestly, I've always been a sentiment junkie since the beginning of me getting into this hobby. So yeah, I'm always excited about new sentiments, and I also love big sentiments too. I like little ones, I like big ones. It just depends on what I'm going for. But these I really like because there's just a lot of great sentiments for everything. So I chose a couple from the set, and I'm going to stamp these onto black cardstock. So I pulled out my mini Misty for this, used my anti-static powder tool, inked up the stamps with clear embossing ink. I actually inked them up and stamped them twice just because they are such large sentiments. And then after I'd stamped them, I coated them with detail white embossing powder. And I did all this twice since I'm doing 2 cards. And then these I'm melting with my Wagner heat tool. This heat tool is amazing. I really love it. It just, yeah. It's just a great heat tool. This I use for my heat embossing. I don't use the Ranger one for that because the Ranger one, it just takes too long. I'd be sitting here forever for, to fully melt embossing powder. So tools for different techniques and that sort of thing. So after I melted all those, I used the coordinating wafer dies. And then off camera, I actually die cut the space between those sentiments with the Thinking of You wafer die, as well as a few scraps, which I'll get to in a second. And then I decided I wanted to add just a little companion sentiment on the front. So I'm using the Family Sentiment Strips pack from this release and chose one of the sentiments. And then I'm just going to die cut that with one of the little sentiment label wafer dies. So I'm going to tape that into place with washi tape. And then I'll die cut that. And since these panels, there's 2 of them, I can die cut both of them. And then for that Thinking of You sentiment, rather than popping it up with foam tape, that's die cut scraps with that same wafer die. That's another, and I don't do this often enough, but that's one of the perks of having coordinating wafer dies for sentiments is you can just die cut scraps with the same wafer die and then stack them together, and there's your dimension, and you're using up scraps, because I swear the scraps are just taking over my life. I use them all the time, but they still they just build up. So this is a good way to use up scraps. So I stacked a couple layers of scraps together that I die cut, just using my craft tacky glue, and then topped it with the sentiment. And then once those were stacked together, I can adhere those to each of these card fronts. And I'm going to adhere them with the craft tacky glue. And then once those are adhered, the little sentiment strip, I'm just going to add one of my little Darice foam strips too. You could also use little scraps. I showed that in my last video. Just thin little scraps of cardstock. That works great too. Could have done that here. Wasn't even thinking of it, even though I just did it. Brain space. Anyway, I just used a little Darice foam strip, stuck it on the back of those little sentiments, and then stuck those into place. Once I had the card fronts with their sentiments done, I wanted to add just a little something extra to the inside of the card, not just that sentiment. So I grabbed the stencil again and just masked everything out except for this big flower. And I'm just going to use the pinks, just keeping it simple. But yeah, I'm going to blend those onto the inside of the cards. I was using Kitsch Flamingo and Picked Raspberry, which are just meant to be love, absolute love. So I just blended those onto the inside of the card, just kind of to sort of be peeking out around the stamped and die cut sentiment. So once I had that blended on the inside, I can adhere those sentiments with more craft tacky glue, and then that finishes off the insides of my cards and still gives me plenty of space to write to the recipient. So again, I love the size of these sentiments. They're just, you can't miss them. So got those adhered into place. And then the card fronts, I'm going to adhere with Simon's Big Mama foam tape, just to give it that little extra bit of dimension. And once I've got those popped into place, I'm going to add just a little bit of bling. I had these left over sitting out from the last card I posted. So added just a little bit of shimmery confetti to each of these cards. Just kind of placing them sort of around the sentiment, really. And then I'm going to adhere those into place with little dabs of craft tacky glue. And then I'm just going to pair these with some, bright, happy yellow envelopes from my stash. And that finishes off these cards. So today's video is actually part of a blog hop. I will have all the info in my blog post, which is linked directly below the video in the description box. So all the info, supplies, etc. linked below in the description box. So check that out below if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping, commenting, all of it. I very much appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.